Black, black, black. Yeah. It ain't my style, it ain't my shade, ain't what I do, ain't what I say. I'm just hella black, I'm just hella black, I'm just hella black. Your fault if you're offended, I'm just hella black, black, black.
Hey y'all, what's up? Welcome back to my parking lot. Today's topic is going to be on the origins of racism in the United States. But let's try to get it in under 5 minutes. Number one, capitalism. Let's go over this in a language that everybody can understand, and that language is money. As soon as cash crops were discovered, Europeans realized that they would have to, in order to get a maximum profit, they would have to find a labor source that they could extract the most labor from the rooter to the tutor, for the cheapest price possible. Once they found Africans, a group of people who lived an indigenous lifestyle, a lifestyle with different cultural presets than that of Europeans, they saw an opportunity. There was an opportunity to demoralize this group of people, to redefine their existence of one that was uncivilized, that was brute, that was savage. And they characterized Africans as a brute subset of human beings that God would excuse the rest of the world for treating them like cattle, like animals, like a product to be commodified and sold. Number two, religion for my Christians. Racist people have used Christianity to back up slavery, to back up racism since the beginning of time. But there were specific stories in the Bible, specific types of scriptures that talked about slaves being obedient to their masters, being dutiful, being loyal to their masters, and being rewarded for their good work. They use us all the time. Certain stories use as kind of revelations that they use to justify enslaving an entire continent of people, and that being the curse of Ham. So if you are not familiar, it's a story about Noah and his sons. It's in Genesis chapter 9, and it talks about how he has 3 sons. Ham finds him, he's drunk, he's laying down naked in the tent. Basically, the story goes is that because of what Ham did, he and all of his descendants would be slaves to his other brothers' children and their descendants. And so somehow Ham became a black man, and all of Ham's descendants populated the continent of Africa. So God meant for them to be slaves anyway. So I'm in here editing, and I did forget at this part that I should mention that religion itself was not just a justification for slavery, but the idea that cleanliness was next to godliness, and being pure as white as snow was equated with the absence of sin. And so blackness became equated with sin and evil and that sort of thing as well. So blackness became an evil thing and something that should be conquered and cleansed. No, and the same people that for thousands of years have said that Jesus is a white man, when the Bible clearly states that the man had hair of wool and feet of bronze. European nations were basically in competition with one another. They were sending boats over to the Americas to stick flags on land and call it their own, because they were trying to amass as much land possible to make it a part of their kingdoms, of their empires. So they look back to ancient civilizations, they look back to medieval times to see how society was set up to formulate their colonies and the way their new societies would work. And historically, in medieval kingdoms, in ancient Greece and ancient Rome and ancient Egypt, there were hierarchies of how people lived. And slaves and peasants were always at the bottom. Slaves and peasants were also darker skinned or dirtier. So they just, were like, oh, well, in the past, darker skinned people are supposed to be slaves anyway, so that's just what we're going to do with Africans. What they did not take into account is that the only reason that there were darker people serving lighter skinned people is because slaves were required to work out in fields and work outside in the sunlight for hours upon hours upon hours. And that's also why people with paler skin tones were historically looked at or viewed as richer. The paler you were, it looked like the more money you had, because that means you had more luxury, that means you had more access to being comfortable. At the time of scientific revolution, there were a lot of people trying to make sense of the difference in race. And biological determinism became a set of beliefs that suggested that people's physical traits and characteristics were linked to different biological functions or features in their bodies or abilities. An example of this would be the study of phrenology. What it was the study of the size of your cranium. And if you had a bigger cranium, that must mean that you have a bigger brain. If you have a bigger brain, that must mean that you must be smarter. And so they would compare the sizes of the craniums of chimps, of black people, and Europeans. And in all cases, they would always find that the Europeans had larger craniums and so larger brains, and so must be smarter than both black people and apes. Also, because a lot of Africans' features were closer to that of primates, they will look at those physical features and basically decide that they must be less evolved than Europeans were. So when people say all lives matter, when people refuse to understand Black Lives Matter, it is because of the continuation of racist ideas in America. So when you say post-racialism is a thing, I have to disagree with you, because people like to skip over the fact that racism is an issue and how it's set up and how it's built and what it makes people do and think. We have to address what has transpired and work through that in order to overcome it. That is why we are still asking you to arrest Breonna Taylor's murderers. That is why we are still marching in the streets. That is why we're still talking about Black Lives Matter, even though you've charged some officers, because charges and convictions are two different things. Because the least that you could do, because you wouldn't give me any reparation, is to give me some recompense in the form of some accountability. So yes, when I say it's white people's fault, I mean historically it has been people who have been white protecting the same system that protects people who have been white. All right, y'all. Catch y'all later. Make sure you follow me on Instagram _LYNEEZY. Some sources are in the bio for you. Peace.